Confidence is not the loudest voice in the room. It doesn't need to stand on tables, demand attention, or prove a point just to feel seen. True confidence walks in quietly, with steady eyes and calm energy that doesn't have to announce what it already knows. It's the quiet certainty that you can handle what's in front of you, even if no one else believes you can. You can always tell the difference between someone who's trying to look confident and someone who simply is. The former needs an audience. The latter doesn't even care who's watching. That's what makes silent confidence magnetic. It draws respect without asking for it. There's a reason why people trust those who move with composure. Silence isn't weakness, it's control. When you're truly confident, you don't feel the urge to fill every silence with words because you're not afraid of being misunderstood. You're not trying to impress anyone, you're just present. You listen more than you speak. You think before you respond. And when you finally do speak, people listen, not because you're loud, but because your words carry weight. Silent strength doesn't rush to defend itself. It knows that time, truth, and action will do the talking. The mistake many people make is confusing noise with power. They think that the louder they speak, the more they'll be believed. But that kind of confidence is fragile. It's built on reaction, not foundation. True confidence doesn't rise and fall with someone else's opinion. It's steady because it doesn't depend on how the world sees it. It depends on how you see yourself. When you're grounded in your own sense of worth, you stop performing. You stop needing to convince anyone. You start moving differently, slower, clearer, and more intentional. Think about the people who've had the biggest influence on you. Chances are they weren't the ones shouting to be heard. They were the ones who spoke with calm conviction. Their words had a rhythm that came from peace, not pressure. That's what silent strength feels like. It's not passive, it's composed. It's the kind of energy that can walk into chaos and still stay centered. It's being able to say, I don't need to prove anything, and mean it. Because confidence doesn't come from what you show, it comes from what you know about yourself when no one's looking. Real confidence also means being comfortable with uncertainty. You don't have to have all the answers because you trust your ability to figure things out. That quiet trust creates a sense of peace that others can feel. It's what makes leaders stand out in crisis. They don't panic, they stay grounded. People follow that energy. They feel safe around someone who isn't shaken by doubt or distracted by noise. That's why silent confidence is so powerful. It calms rooms, it settles tension, and it earns trust without saying much at all. Confidence is knowing that strength doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it's walking away from arguments that don't deserve your energy. Sometimes it's staying silent when someone expects you to react, because silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone who's already decided not to see it. The quietest people often have the deepest certainty because they've learned that power doesn't need to announce itself to exist. They're not driven by ego, they're anchored by understanding. That's why silent strength is unshakable. It's built slowly through moments of restraint, self-respect, and self-awareness. Every time you choose calm over chaos, confidence grows. Every time you hold your ground without raising your voice, you reinforce it. And the beauty of true confidence is that it doesn't need to convince anyone else. It just shows up, steady and certain, like a quiet storm that doesn't ask to be believed. Confidence begins to fade the moment it depends on someone else's approval. When your sense of worth is tied to how others respond, you hand over control of your peace. True confidence doesn't seek validation because it already lives in self-acceptance. It doesn't need a round of applause to feel secure. It doesn't check for likes or reassurance to confirm its direction. When you know who you are, you stop waiting for someone to tell you that you're enough. The loudest approval you'll ever need is the quiet one that comes from within, the one that whispers, "I'm good even if no one says I am." That kind of self-validation is what frees you from constantly performing for the world. People often confuse recognition with value. They think being noticed means being worthy, but those two aren't the same. Confidence doesn't need to be recognized to be real. You can be doing incredible things in silence and still be secure in your progress. You don't need to broadcast every achievement or explain every move. The validation trap is subtle. It tells you that you're missing something if no one sees your effort. But that's a lie that keeps you chasing instead of growing. When you stop needing validation, you start focusing on the work itself. You stop measuring your worth through someone else's lens and start defining it through your own reflection. Validation feels good. It's human to want to be seen. But when it becomes a requirement, it turns into a cage. You end up filtering your choices through other people's comfort instead of your own truth. You start holding back opinions, dimming your personality, and shaping yourself to fit the version others like best. That's not confidence, that's survival disguised as approval. Real confidence doesn't ask, will they like this? It asks, does this align with me? Because the moment you live for applause, you lose your authenticity. The people who respect you most are the ones who feel your honesty, not your perfection. When you no longer need validation, you stop trying to prove your value in every interaction. You don't chase people who don't recognize your worth, because you've already recognized it yourself. You start protecting your peace instead of defending your reputation. You stop explaining your decisions to those who never intend to understand them. That quiet shift changes everything. It gives you authority over your own narrative. You don't need permission to grow, to change, or to walk away. The validation you once craved becomes irrelevant because your focus is no longer on being liked. It's on being aligned. Confidence without validation looks like stillness in the face of doubt. It's being comfortable when people question you, misunderstand you, or overlook you. You understand that their perception doesn't alter your truth. That's emotional independence. When your identity isn't built on feedback, you can listen, you can learn, but you're not defined by the reaction. And ironically, that's when people start believing in you more, because nothing is more convincing than someone who doesn't need convincing. Confidence becomes contagious when it's self-contained. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached. It means you build your validation system internally. You start asking, did I show up with integrity instead of, did they notice me? You start celebrating your own effort before anyone else does. And you realize that the people who truly matter won't need you to prove yourself. They'll just see it. The less you depend on validation, the more power you regain. You stop chasing mirrors and start being the reflection. You start living in alignment with your values instead of expectations. That's where freedom lives, not in being admired, but in being authentic. Every time you choose not to seek validation, you strengthen your inner voice. It grows louder, steadier, and more certain. That's the voice that keeps you grounded when doubt creeps in. It tells you to keep moving even when no one claps. It reminds you that your worth isn't a debate, it's a fact. The goal isn't to be seen by everyone, it's to be sure of yourself no matter who's watching. Because the most confident people are not those who are praised the most, but those who need praise the least. Confidence isn't about how well you perform for others. It's about how certain you are within yourself. Most people mistake confidence for charisma, thinking it's about how you appear, how you speak, or how you move in a room. But real confidence has nothing to do with showmanship. It's an internal knowing that doesn't need to be displayed. You don't have to impress anyone to validate your strength. You don't have to constantly prove your competence to be competent. When you're certain about who you are and what you bring to the table, you stop performing. You start existing as yourself, unfiltered, grounded, and unapologetically clear about your value. That certainty is what people truly feel when they call someone confident. Performance-based confidence is fragile because it depends on reaction. You might feel powerful when people applaud, but the moment they stop, you shrink. That's not confidence. That's dependency. When you base your worth on performance, you begin to measure your identity by outcomes and approval. You start doing things to look strong instead of to be strong. You speak to sound intelligent instead of to connect. You move to be seen instead of to express. That kind of confidence will always keep you chasing validation because it's built on perception. But certainty doesn't change with opinion. It's a calm knowing that says, even if I fail today, I'm still capable. That's a kind of peace performance can never deliver. The most grounded people you'll meet aren't the ones putting on a show. They're the ones who don't need the stage. Their certainty speaks for them. You can see it in the way they carry themselves, measured, steady, deliberate. They don't over-explain their choices or try to dominate every conversation. They don't need to, because when you're certain, silence feels natural. You don't have to overcompensate for insecurity. You don't have to perform confidence. You embody it. It's in your tone, your eye contact, your pauses. People respond to that energy because it's real. You can't fake stillness. You can't imitate self-assurance for long. Eventually, performance cracks, but certainty remains. When you shift from performance to certainty, you start living from truth rather than image. You make decisions that feel right instead of ones that look right. You stop saying yes to things just to seem capable. You stop stretching yourself thin to meet external expectations. Confidence becomes quiet alignment, not constant demonstration. And it's not that you stop caring about results, you just stop letting results define you. You measure yourself by effort, by intention, by authenticity. The more you practice that, the more stable your self-belief becomes. You don't crumble when things go wrong because your worth isn't tied to success. You don't inflate when things go right because your worth was never in question. Certainty also changes how you communicate. Performance wants to persuade. Certainty wants to connect. When you're certain, you speak from clarity, not from fear. You're not trying to convince people. You're expressing your truth. You're not performing knowledge. You're sharing understanding. That difference is what makes confident communication so powerful. People can sense when your words are coming from certainty rather than insecurity. They lean in not because you're performing, but because you're authentic. You're not putting on a version of yourself to be accepted. You're presenting the real one, trusting it's enough. It takes time to unlearn the habit of performing. Many of us grow up believing confidence means appearing flawless, never stuttering, never doubting, never showing weakness. But certainty has nothing to do with perfection. It's built on self-awareness. It's the ability to say, I don't know, without shame. It's being okay with mistakes because you trust your ability to recover. That's what true confidence looks like. It's not polished, it's honest. And honesty will always outlast performance. You can only pretend to be confident for so long before the truth shows. Certainty doesn't fade because it's not built on pretending. It's built on understanding, patience, and consistency. The moment you stop performing, everything softens. You stop pushing so hard to be impressive, and you start focusing on being present. You realize you don't need the spotlight to prove your worth. You can be enough without the applause, enough without the recognition, enough without performing confidence for anyone, because when you live in certainty, your presence becomes the performance, and it speaks louder than anything you could ever say. Confidence isn't the one shouting to be heard. It's the one quietly holding composure when everything around feels loud. Calm is power because it doesn't need to dominate. It observes before it reacts, it pauses before it speaks, and it listens before it decides. When you're calm, you're in control, not because the situation is easy, but because your emotions aren't driving your decisions. That's what separates confidence from ego. Ego rushes to prove, to defend, to win. Confidence doesn't chase any of that. It simply knows. And knowing gives you the freedom to respond instead of react. The loudest person in the room might get attention, but the calmest one always earns respect. Ego wants to be right. confidence wants to be effective. When you're grounded in calm, your focus isn't on being the smartest voice, it's on being the most centered presence. You're not trying to win an argument, you're trying to understand what matters. Ego speaks to be heard, while confidence speaks to create impact, and the difference is felt instantly. Calm energy draws people in because it feels safe. It's steady, unshaken, and unbothered by chaos. That's the strength of inner peace. It doesn't shout about being strong, it simply stands unmovable when everything else wavers. You can always sense when someone is speaking from ego. Their tone carries tension, their words carry insecurity. They interrupt more than they listen because deep down they're not trying to connect, they're trying to control. Calm confidence doesn't need to control anyone. It understands that power doesn't come from domination, it comes from discipline. You don't have to prove superiority to feel secure. You don't have to raise your voice to command presence. Calm does the heavy lifting for you. It's authority without aggression, certainty without arrogance. The moment you learn to remain calm when provoked, you've learned one of the rarest forms of mastery. Being calm doesn't mean you lack emotion. It means emotion doesn't own you. You can feel anger, disappointment, or frustration, but you don't let them dictate your behavior. That kind of control is what true confidence looks like. It's not about never being shaken. It's about how quickly you return to balance after you are. The calm person still feels everything. They just choose their response carefully. They don't mirror chaos with chaos. They create clarity where others bring confusion. That's how calm speaks. It doesn't interrupt, it influences. It doesn't compete with noise, it replaces it with direction. Ego craves recognition, while confidence values understanding. When you lead with calm, you stop needing to be the hero in every story. You realize that wisdom doesn't need validation, and peace doesn't need performance. You start to let things go, not because you don't care, but because you know that holding on steals your focus. You stop engaging in every argument, not because you can't win, but because you choose not to waste energy proving something that truth will reveal on its own. That's what calm people understand. Silence is not weakness, it's strategy. Sometimes saying nothing is the most powerful way to show you're in control. Calm confidence is what people remember long after the conversation ends. It's the quiet tone that cut through tension, the steady gaze that diffused anger, the patience that turned conflict into resolution. Those moments build trust. People feel your composure before they believe your words. That's why calm is so influential. It's contagious. It reminds others that strength doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like grace. In a world that rewards speed and reaction, calm becomes a rare signal of depth. It's not passive, it's deliberate. It's the energy of someone who knows they can handle whatever comes next. And that's what makes calm louder than ego. It doesn't seek to dominate the moment, it defines it. It doesn't compete with noise, it quiets it. It doesn't demand respect, it earns it through presence. The person who can stay centered when everyone else loses balance always becomes the anchor. Calm doesn't beg to be noticed, it naturally commands attention. Because real confidence doesn't raise its voice to prove its strength, it lets its peace do the talking. Confidence isn't about proving anything, it's about believing without needing an audience. The strongest form of self-assurance comes from quiet conviction, that inner knowing that says, I don't need to be seen to be sure. When you're confident in your belief, you don't chase validation, you don't argue for recognition, and you don't shrink when others doubt you. You understand that proof is not the foundation of truth, it's the byproduct of consistency. People who constantly need to prove themselves end up exhausting their energy on convincing instead of becoming. Real confidence understands that belief is enough, because when you truly know who you are, evidence becomes optional. The need to prove yourself often comes from fear of being overlooked, underestimated, or misunderstood. But belief doesn't depend on who understands it. It's not built on how many agree, it's built on how deeply you trust yourself. That's why confident people move differently. They don't chase explanations or arguments, they move with quiet clarity. They don't fight to be believed, they focus on showing up with integrity. Belief doesn't need to be broadcasted. It reveals itself in consistency in the way you keep going even when no one notices. The proof eventually shows itself, but by the time it does, you no longer need it. When your confidence is anchored in belief rather than proof, you stop over-explaining yourself. You stop trying to make others see your worth. You realize that not everyone is supposed to understand your journey, and that's okay. Confidence doesn't demand agreement. It welcomes misunderstanding without losing balance. You no longer chase people's approval because you've accepted that belief is a personal thing. It lives inside you, not in the opinions surrounding you. Every time you choose to trust yourself without validation, your confidence grows stronger, quieter, and more unshakable. Belief without proof is what builds leaders. It's what allows you to take risks, to start something before it's perfect, to stand firm even when the crowd disagrees. Because belief gives you courage when evidence doesn't exist yet. It's easy to believe when results are visible, but confidence comes from believing before results appear. That's what separates dreamers from doers. You can't wait for proof to start trusting yourself. You have to start trusting yourself to create the proof. And that trust doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from preparation, consistency, and experience that teaches you, I can handle this. People often mistake humility for doubt, but belief can be both quiet and humble. It doesn't need to announce itself because it knows its own depth. You don't have to prove your potential to anyone who doubts it. You don't have to justify your path to those who can't see it. When you stop arguing for your worth, you reclaim the energy you once spent defending it. You begin to move from a place of peace rather than pressure. Belief doesn't shout, it shows through endurance. It doesn't demand to be recognized, it reveals itself in time. The proof eventually comes, but belief is what keeps you steady until it does. The people who live with real confidence don't rely on external confirmation. They understand that opinions are temporary, but truth endures. When someone doubts them, they don't rush to convince. They let consistency handle the conversation. That's the quiet authority of confidence. It trusts time more than talk. You don't have to argue when your actions will prove what words cannot. And even when things don't go as planned, belief doesn't break. It bends, it learns, it adjusts, but it never disappears. Because real confidence is built on self-trust, not self-promotion. Belief without proof is uncomfortable, but it's where growth lives. It's the space between who you are and who you're becoming. Confidence means standing there without panic, knowing that what you're building will eventually be seen. You don't need to force the outcome or explain your process. You just keep moving with faith in your direction. That's the quiet beauty of confidence. It doesn't need to prove because it already knows. The belief itself becomes the proof.